Stop worrying and love the blockchain. I am the CEO and founder of a San Diego tech startup called Blockchain Technology Group. And our mission, as you can see on the screen, is to create open source distributed software platforms to increase individual access to knowledge, power, and social justice worldwide. I'll get into what I mean by that in a little bit. First, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, my own kind of history. I think we all kind of know that there is a great deal wrong with the world. Unjustifiable wars of aggression kind of everywhere you look. Political system is completely broken. We have an unsustainable manufacturing system. We have a corrupt food supply, and our financial system is pretty obviously a joke. So I wanted to tell you some personal stories that illuminated those particular problems for me, and eventually what led me to discover what I believe to be the solution. So 15 years ago, I wanted to go to college, and I didn't have any way to pay for it myself. So I found some recruiter selling a real cushy deal that I was just going to have to go off to boot camp for 6 months or 3 months, and then go to school of infantry for another 3 months, and then never have to do anything again. It'd be a reserve in a program going full-time to college. And this is a great opportunity for me. Well, I do my 6 months, and a month after I graduated school of infantry, 9/11 happened, and the cushy deal went away. And we got activated and did a year of quick response force in case there is further terrorism in the United States, and preparing our infantry skills. We didn't know why at the time. A year later, we deployed to invade Iraq. So that was an interesting experience for me. I'm fortunate that I wasn't hurt. I didn't watch any friends die, but I had my own traumas to deal with over the years, but I won't get too stuck on that. For me, it was really just an interesting story to tell people for the time. So I just came home, went about my life. And a few years later, I deployed to Africa, a little country called Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. It gets up to 145 degrees, and everyone in the country is hooked on a crazy psychotropic drug. It was quite a strange experience. But our job, basically, this was essentially the third front on the global war on terror, trying to prevent Al-Qaeda, et cetera, to be able to recruit people from Africa. So our job was just to kind of be a force for good there, or whatever. Our particular unit's job was to watch the wire, to provide security for the base, and to be a quick response force in case anything happens out in town. If Somalia invades, or if there's a terrorist attack or anything like that. But for the most part, it was quite quiet. But there was actually a day when I was in charge of the quick response platoon, and we got a call to rush out to the incineration plant outside of the camp. And we're like, oh my gosh, is there a terrorist attack or something like this? So we get our gear, we grab our guns, we load up into the Humvees, and we rush out, and we get out there, and we just find a bunch of Djiboutians just sitting on the ground next to a bus, and the Kellogg Brown and Root employees who are running the base standing there, just kind of yelling at them and angry. And we get out, and we're like, what's going on here? I don't see anything wrong. There's no attack. There's no craziness. Well, it turns out that the Djiboutians working the incinerator wanted better working conditions. Either they were working too long, or they didn't have enough protective equipment, or whatever it was. And they decided they were going to be inspired by American democracy and form sit-ins, stages sit-in. Well, KBR wasn't interested. They knew that there was plenty of other recruits out in town who would be happy to take the job. So they just wanted to get them onto a bus and get them out of the camp and fire them all and get a new batch in and not have to do anything about improving the working conditions. So just by us getting there and getting out of the vehicles, suddenly the Djiboutians get all kind of freaked out. They hop in their van and they drive away. And they're fired, and we never see them again. And it was very unsettling for me. It was very much of a realization of, okay, I did not sign up to serve my country to be a jackbooted thug and shut down a peaceful protest. And that was just kind of the beginning for me of asking questions about the official story, what we're being told is going on in the world, versus my own experiences, and what else is what else I'm learning about the world that doesn't really sit well with that. So I got home, I got out of the Marine Corps, and I became a visual effects compositor in Hollywood. Unfortunately, this was just at a time when kind of Hollywood was being hit by globalization, and work was offshoring very rapidly. So I was doing a lot of extra freelance work on the side. And in one gig, I was responsible for making a post-apocalyptic city skyline with buildings collapsing off in the distance. And so I thought, well, where can I find some footage of a steel building collapsing and learn how that actually works? So I get on YouTube and I search for 9/11 building collapse. And lo and behold, I did not find what I expected to find. I found the other side of YouTube. And I got stuck in it for quite a while, obviously. And it just kind of shook me to the bones. I was aware of a couple of people telling me, well, I don't know if we really know what happened with 9/11. But for all those years that I was in the Marine Corps, it was very much important to me that I continue to believe the mission. Otherwise, I couldn't very well support my brothers in arms. And whether I was aware of it consciously or not, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I was able to make a psychological switch and no longer have to protect myself from that kind of information. And I just started going deep, deep down the rabbit hole and questioning absolutely everything. Starting with the war on drugs. Why exactly did we invade Afghanistan? Was it because we were afraid of terrorism? Or maybe does it have more to do with this chart? The Taliban in 2000 decided that it was against their religious beliefs to grow opium. And so they effected what the UN actually called the most effective drug eradication program in history. And then we invaded. And we unseated the Taliban from power. And suddenly, opium levels go right back up. And they're higher than they've ever been. And there's many stories of grunts just standing there in the fields and protecting opium and marijuana fields. And our official take is, oh, we just don't mess with their business. That's up to them to do. And I'm asking more questions like, what about the origins of the war that I was involved in? Or all these other wars of aggression that we're fighting, and we're coming up with various kind of hard to believe, very thin defenses for why we're doing it. And I learned something. I'm going to give you a little bit of history about something called Bretton Woods. It was an agreement made post-World War II with 44 nations that decided that all oil would be sold in US dollars. And this made the US dollar the world reserve currency. And so I come to find out that a few years before we invaded Iraq, Saddam decided he was going to sell oil in euros. And this very much threatened our hegemony as the world reserve currency. So we said, that's not going to happen anymore. Libya, years later. Muammar Gaddafi was our ally, and then he starts talking about weird 9/11 conspiracy theories and starts talking about, I'm going to create a new currency for Africa based on gold. And Africa has more gold than anyone, so we're going to have the strongest currency, and that's going to unseat the US dollar. And I'm going to sell my oil in these African dinars. And he goes from close ally to send the French in to bomb him and take the regime down. And then you start looking at Syria and Ukraine, and these conflicts are very much centered around the manufacturing and the distribution of natural gas, which isn't regulated by Bretton Woods. So it is absolutely a threat to our ability to just print money wanton, just willy-nilly, and expect that the rest of the world will always have to accept it because they have to buy their energy in it. Well, Russia and some other parts of the world have started to figure out holes in that and are starting to really challenge that. So I'm asking myself, all these, I'm revisiting all these truths that I expected to understand. I ran a design company, and we did our manufacturing in China for a couple of years. And it was a lot of fun to do. The design process was great. We had a couple of great customers. But it was always a problem dealing with manufacturing delays, and it wasn't quite the quality we approved. And so eventually I went over to China and tried to understand the whole manufacturing process. And I loved the people and the 5,000 years of history and the culture, and I hated what I learned about how goods are manufactured. They're very much reliant on this concept called externalized costs. If you consider some little $5 electronic thing that you buy at the store, and think about all the things that went into that. All the raw materials that became the components, and then the manufacturing of the components, the shipping of the components to a factory that then molds the plastic and builds the thing, puts the whole thing together using human labor, and then ships it over the oceans, and then ships it all the way down to the store, and the retailer has to take their cut. There's no way that $5 actually represents all of the value, all of the costs that went into that. There are a lot of costs that we just don't account for. The health tolls on the workers themselves, the pollution that's created by those factories, the fossil fuels that are being just destroyed and abused to ship these goods from wherever the highest concentration of poverty that's willing to work as cheap as possible to where all the buyers are. The natural resources that we're depleting to create all those components. It's absolutely unsustainable. I then became aware of really big problems with our food supply. My fiance was sick for many, many years, and we could never figure out what it was. She saw doctor after doctor after doctor, and eventually it was said it's fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, whatever that means. And what we came to figure out was that it basically meant that she was completely poisoned by the food supply. We're putting chemicals into our bodies that we don't understand, that there are parts of the world that have absolutely rejected them. China's actually saying, we're going to watch how American children develop for 10 years and then decide if we're going to allow this new crazy thing that's going to change the core nature of our food. Food that we're used to for millions of years, we're now changing it at a genetic level. And we're expecting that we're going to trust some tech company or some agro company to tell us that it's safe. So there's a lot of things that I'm getting upset about at this point, and I went and I protested about it. And every time you get all motivated and excited, and all the people around you are sharing all this, amazing, powerful energy, and we're going to change the world, and then you go home and watch the news, and there's barely a blip, if anything, and you just kind of eventually kind of start to form this picture that this isn't making any change. This isn't making anything happen. And I gave speeches and talked about kind of my own experiences and how they didn't fit with the official story. We need to revisit these questions. And eventually a couple of buddies of mine, some other Marine vets, we decided let's try a different tack. Let's put on suits and go to Washington. All these congressmen and politicians are talking about how they love to support veterans and they love to support the troops, so let's just go talk to them face to face and explain to them why all of these ridiculous wars of aggression are not good for our national security. From a very conservative perspective of national security and how actually important that is. We accepted that and we said, but this is the wrong way to do it. And everyone opened their doors to us. We got meetings at the White House, the State Department, dozens of congressmen and senators. And they all just glad-handed us and told us how great it was that we were there and doing our civic duty, and they agreed with the things, the arguments that we were making and all this stuff. And then we leave a week later and they decide to vote for the surge in Afghanistan, and Obama approves the surge in Afghanistan, and it's all for nil. So I'm feeling pretty depressed sometime last year that there's all these collective cliffs that we're driving off of as a civilization. How on earth could we possibly survive as humanity? We're destroying our resources. No one can trust each other, etc. You got all these massive problems that are not changing on their own. They're all going straight in a direction of absolute disaster. And then I discover this thing written by Strauss and Howe, this generational theory. There's a book about it called The Fourth Turning. It's Strauss and Howe generational theory is another way to look it up. And basically the theory is that the natural human lifespan is 80 years, and it's broken up into 4 seasons. In your first 20 years, you are forming your worldview. You're completely reliant on other people, and you don't really have much ability to affect any difference in the world. Your next 20 years, you're starting to form some positions of power. You're a lot more independent. You're a lot more loud and boisterous and angry about the ills of the world, but you don't quite have the power that you need to change it. You're 40 to 60, you're in management positions, you're leading military, government, business. You have most likely the most power you're going to have individually in the world. And then 60s to 80s, you're retiring, you're depending on other people. Again, you don't have quite as much influence as once had. And what's interesting, what they discovered, was that there's been cycles throughout at least Western history and elsewhere, there's a lot of examples of this, where every 20 years, all 4 of those generational groups on the planet shift their roles. The elderly die off, the management retire, the kind of young, angry take over the management positions, the youth go into young and angry and a new generation is born. And when this happens, during the course of a few years while these shifts are happening across the entire planet, opportunities for really massive shifts in the way things are happening appear. Because where the previous generation who was in power might have pushed back against some new technology and felt like this is not the way to go because it challenges the way we do things and I don't like this. And the new generation that didn't quite have the ability to get anything done was the one rallying behind it. So now that they've moved into a position where they can do something about it, suddenly enormous bursts of new technology can come forth. And the kind of tech that actually changes the entire world. in the turn of the century, 19th into the 20th century, in a lot of large cities around the world, there was a very big problem that was created by the fact that all transportation was happening with horses. We had a very large horse manure problem. There was concerns around the world that in major cities like New York and Paris and San Francisco, by 1910, 1920, there was going to be two stories of manure that no one knew how to get rid of in an effective way. And there was conventions to try to figure out what is the solution to this. Meanwhile, the car was invented in the 1880s, but the generation who was deriving a lot of value from supporting horse feed and horse-drawn carriages, etc., were the ones who were pushing back and saying, we don't like this crazy, scary, horseless carriage thing, this demon vehicle. They leave positions of power, and turn of the century, the car starts being looked at anew by a new generation, and says the power, or the generation with the power of the purse, and says, we like this thing, and they embrace it very, very quickly. And technology has changed, we're saved, we no longer have a problem with manure any longer. And this cycle has continued. The telephone, the personal computer, the internet. And if you look at the cycle, right now we're due for another one. So what is that going to be? Some people think it's Bitcoin. Recently I saw an interview with Steve Jobs from 1977 where he talked about a National Geographic article that charted the energy efficiency of all the animals in the animal kingdom, the amount of distance you could travel on a kilocalorie. And some bird, or I think a cheetah maybe, was all the way up on the most efficient, and man was actually pretty weak. But someone had the insight to, well, let's look at man on a bicycle. And man on a bicycle was way out. And what it demonstrates is that while our muscles might not be very strong, our intelligence and our ability to invent gives us more strength, lets us become stronger than anything else and grow and evolve. So the question is this new thing, Bitcoin, going to be that next evolution, the thing that changes the world? Well, let me give you a little bit of a history of the internet. In 1996, I had a job as a tech support agent at San Diego's first ISP. And this is in the AOL days when everyone's understanding of the internet was pretty wrong. And these ISPs are springing up to try to change that and give people direct access to the entire internet itself. And so, unfortunately, it wasn't as easy to use. And so all of our customers had to go through a very high wall, a very high barrier of how to get into the internet. You had to ship them a floppy disk with modem codes on it and stuff like that. And as a tech support agent, I had like front row seats at this explosion of new technology, people being told this is going to absolutely change everything. And if you can see, this is when there was 36 million users or so at the time, and we've come quite a bit from there. And so there was a guy that was very much responsible for how the internet was developed the way it is. His name is Mark Andreessen. And there was an argument at the time, like when the internet was first proposed, as to you've got these transport protocols that can move files, move emails, move data, but we really need a protocol that can move value. If that's the last thing that's getting in the way, if you can't send money over the internet, it's not really complete. Because there's things you can do with that. You can charge a very, very tiny fee to hit a website. You can charge a very, very tiny fee to send an email. And it doesn't have to be anything that hurts anyone individually in the pocketbook, but if someone tries to abuse it and send 1 million emails, it costs them too much money to do so. So the thinking was, in order to try to prevent things like spam and DDoS attacks, you needed to have some sort of an internet money. No one could quite figure out how to do it, and there was proposals by like Microsoft and Oracle that they were going to create a centralized internet currency. They called it a VIGish, that would enable this. They would pay for the infrastructure of the internet to be created, and users would all pay a VIGish to be able to access it, to be able to browse websites or send emails and stuff like that. And it was rejected because they would have had to create the internet as this proprietary, closed source, closed platform that was pretty much driven entirely by these few tech companies. And that really wasn't workable for the world. And so this guy, Mark Andreessen, he said, no, there's a better way. We need to have open source standards, an open source protocol, and we need to build an open source software language on top of that that people can use very easily. Most users can learn something like HTML very, very simply, just by looking at its source and copying and pasting. And that was the intention behind the web browser. So in '92, they decided, let's just develop this free web browser thing and put it out in the world and see if it allows people to get on board while it's an open and free system. And it worked, as we can see. But the problem was we still never solved that last question of the internet money. The thing that allows you to have that final level of security, where doing things on the internet costs you some small amount of money so that you can't abuse it. And a lot of people think that that's what Bitcoin is, where the problem with the concept of the biggish is it would be controlled by those companies, by those individual companies. And so if they wanted to change the nature of it, or if they wanted to throw it out altogether, all of the nodes that are connected to it would cease to function. Well, instead we got the internet as we know it today. It's decentralized. The financial incentive part is provided by the ISPs, and they get money from us to create the backbone of the internet and maintain the backbone of the internet. What Satoshi Nakamoto figured out how to do was create a distributed computer network where those distributed computer nodes are collaborating without a leader. They're able to collectively create a secure method for value transfer. So we have a distributed mesh, which basically means the internet is now complete. We have that last value transfer protocol. Because of the collective nature of how these nodes are working together, you end up with a system where there can be no counterfeiting of the token. There can be no fraudulent bank accounting because the accounting is all in public. And you leave control in the hands of all the individual users. They can receive money, save money, and send money without needing some other institution to do the work for them, like we do currently. And as a result of all this, you end up with these things that are unique assets on the internet. Normally when we think of the internet and data, we think of it as very easily copyable. In this case, because of the mechanism that Satoshi figured out, it is not. These individual assets called bitcoins, or there are many other cryptocurrencies, are in fact unique. They can't be copied, and no one else can steal it from you without you giving it to them. So if you think about power as organized effort, we all exert effort in various different directions, but if we're not directing it in one organized direction, it's not as powerful. There's been a number of different ways to organize effort in the past. Church, governments, nonprofits, corporations. Unfortunately, they're all mired with corruption, inefficiency, and greed, which weakens their ability to actually organize effort and get the things done that are being sought to get done. The blockchain and other distributed technology allows effort to be organized behind the collective will of something without central points of failure. So what really blew my mind was after discovering Bitcoin and learning about Bitcoin and seeing how wonderful it was, discovering something called Namecoin. Satoshi, before he disappeared into the ether, created two blockchains, Bitcoin for value, for money transfer, and Namecoin. What Namecoin does is it decentralizes the DNS process. So when Prime Minister Erdogan wanted to deny people of Turkey from the ability to see Twitter and YouTube last year, the way he did that was he just turned off DNS for those websites. He can't shut down the websites himself. He turned off DNS for those websites in his country. With Namecoin, you have a system where no one can do that anymore. So you're starting to see how it's possible to start creating these platforms that can't be shut down, can't be altered by some government or institution that's interested in doing so, and can do really wonderful things. You can transfer money in one case. You can register the ownership of a particular domain with another one. And what we realized is that, in fact, you could do quite a bit more than that. Because the blockchain technology creates micropayments, creates the ability to send very, very tiny amounts of money, much smaller than you could do with a credit card. It costs way too high because of all the manual processes involved in banking to use credit card payments and debit card payments to send 1 cent, things like that, or even less. With cryptocurrencies, you can send extremely tiny, tiny amounts of money. And because of this, you can create a process where you can distribute micro work. And you can start to take platforms, software, services that you use on the web that are currently centralized, that are being completely controlled by the company who created that particular software, and move them into a distributed model. There's been examples of distributed computing for many years. One called Folding at Home, another one called SETI at Home. These are about 15-year-old projects whose goal is to do really important things for humanity. Folding at Home is trying to cure cancer, essentially. It's doing protein folding, and it's using a mesh of computers all around the world to contribute a little bit of the math involved in doing so. And people run it just as a screensaver. It's been very successful for many years. SETI at Home is listening to all the noise coming in from space and trying to find patterns and see if we're in fact alone in the universe. These are both really, really important things for us to figure out. Folding at Home and SETI at Home have been around for 15 years. They've had a lot of positive press. They have executive leadership that's guiding them in the right direction and stuff like that. Whereas Bitcoin, on the other hand, is 5 years old, has no executive structure whatsoever, has gotten nothing but negative press for most of its life, except it has many times greater computing power being contributed toward it than Folding at Home or SETI at Home. Well, why is that? It's because there is a financial incentive. We've been able to do distributed computing, but without the financial incentive, it could never really get as much computing power as it really needed. Now that you can pay someone to at least offset their electricity, if not maybe make an extra stream of revenue just with their computer's idle power, you can distribute a whole bunch. So I'm going to show you our first example of a distributed application. It's in early beta right now. It's called Alexanderia. We call it history written by everyone, not just the victors. The idea was inspired, actually the title was come up with by Ryan over there. The idea was inspired when I came into Bitcoin. I discovered that most of the conversation was happening on Twitter. And I was really impressed by the wealth of knowledge that was being shared by the world about this particular subject. But it was unfortunate because if I wasn't following just the right person at just the right time, it was lost. If I wanted to search for what the world is saying about Bitcoin a month ago, there are no opportunities for me to do so. Even Twitter doesn't keep its own information more than a few weeks. It's just too dang much. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to capture that information, topical-based information, where rather than grabbing all of Twitter and people just kind of taking pictures of what they're eating for dinner, we grab topical information that people are actually interested in. So things like Bitcoin or Ukraine or the comet landing. And we use a distributed network of what we call librarians to accept these kind of work orders. I want you to start searching the Twitter stream for this particular term, collect it all, and then start archiving at every certain period of time. And putting it into a distributed database that all the rest of the librarians have access to as well, and then putting what's called a hash, which is basically just when you take a large sum of information and run it through an encryption algorithm, you get a very short piece of information on the back end. And if that original information is changed even in the slightest bit, one little tiny amount, you run it through the encryption algorithm, it'll come out differently. But if you don't make any changes and you run it through that encryption algorithm at any time in the future, it'll always come out the same. So what we do is we just put a hash of these large volumes of information into a blockchain. And this blockchain is the same technology that Satoshi Nakamoto invented, where you've got a collective effort to create security of the information in the chain, so that no one can go back later and edit and alter and change the contents or the time or the existence of any particular information. And then we put a data visualization layer on top so that we can summarize that information. And we can see, well, let's see a good example. Well, Ukraine is a good one from a couple days ago. Rather than trying to see every single individual tweet that's happening about a particular thing, I want to kind of see summaries of it. So let me look for, we just discovered this the other day. So we take the sum of the information over the period of time that you have selected, this is a date slider at the bottom, and say what are the words that are most often repeated. So you can just get a big picture view of what's going on at any particular period of time. And then as you browse it and you decide well, this is really interesting, this is a great kind of archive of history, and I'm going to keep on searching for this topic and this topic and this topic. And eventually you kind of find a topic that no one is archiving at the time. And you say, this is particularly interesting to me. I'd like to keep it stored in the world. Let's see, tanks, there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and volunteer to spend $1 to archive this particular topic for the next month or 6 months or whatever. It depends on exactly how particularly popular that particular term is, how much people are sharing it. So a couple of days ago we discovered this, that back last week the word tanks became extremely large in the archive, and we could look at that and we could see what exactly is happening, and that there's Russia is kind of invading Ukraine actively with tanks at this point. And so what you end up with is something where, if this was running around 9/11 or the invasion of Afghanistan or Iraq, what we would see over the course of time is, at the very beginning there's the official story, there's all the news coverage of it, there's all the things that are being said to tell the world about what's going on. And then over the course of time we start seeing kind of alternative versions of history and alternative explanations of the things that we all saw start to crop up and start to poke up. So currently, if I wanted to go and do research on a particular piece of history, I would go to Wikipedia, and it would give me a whole list of this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. The problem is, I have no idea who edited the last version of that particular page, and if they had any personal intention or will to change the information or deceive me. With this, you can pull up an archive of a topic over a certain period of time and learn exactly what was being said by the whole world about that topic, and know that it's going to be there forever, and that if I ever wanted to go back and compare what I'm seeing on the screen right now with what was put into the blockchain way back in the day, we can see that it was never altered. So right now we've got it set up so that we can see links to things like Twitter video or YouTube videos and blog posts and things like that are just listed in line. Next step, they're going to be shown. We're going to see previews of them. We're going to see YouTube videos in there, so that you can just go across the big picture of what's going on, and you can stop at a particular point and you can see, well, what is the most popularly tweeted thing about this particular topic, and watch a video about it and whatnot. And for now, we'll continue to rely on that data being stored where it is hosted originally, on YouTube or on a blog post or something like that. Next step is we're going to start archiving one copy of all those videos, linked pictures, etc. And we're going to take that particular piece of content, we're going to make a hash of it, like I was describing before, and put that into the blockchain. And we're going to continue to serve up from its original source, because YouTube's spending so much money on bandwidth, might as well take advantage of it. And every time someone comes along and wants to watch that video, it'll compare it to the hash in the blockchain and make sure that it hasn't been changed. And if they get to it and it's been changed or it's been removed, as a lot of these kind of, whenever you've got kind of alternative explanations of what's going on in the world, oftentimes those videos disappear very quickly. So if it's changed or if it's disappeared, we'll then serve up one backup that's being hosted by a distributed mesh of computers again. So rather than having to rely on the bandwidth coming out of a single company, all of the computers that are interested in this can share bandwidth with each other. It uses something called BitTorrent technology, distributed hash tables. And it's why with BitTorrent technology you could stream a 1080p movie or a lossless FLAC audio file, which is lossless music, without relying on big server farms and massive bandwidth. So the next step beyond archiving these YouTube videos is actually allowing people to put up original content. So podcasters can put up content, they can put up their video and know that it's going to be streamed to all the people that want to watch it. And rather than relying on ads to generate any kind of input from or income from the work that they're doing, we'll have crypto tipping built into it. The next step after that, we're going to have movies with DRM, with a distributed peer-to-peer DRM, so that you can actually list independent media, movies, music, etc., and know that it can never be taken down, and that you are going to be collecting the vast majority of the income from that, rather than some distribution company that's paying a load for bandwidth and for all the various things that they have to. This isn't a company that's hosting this, this is a distributed mesh that's hosting this. So, at this point, if I have helped you at all to believe, like I do, that these kind of distributed technologies have the potential to put control for everything back into everyone's hands, not just the powers that be, then there's a number of things that I would suggest that you do. First of all, just remind yourself that there is in fact hope. That as scary as all these driving off cliffs is, it's the fact that it's happening that's going to motivate people to figure out the solutions, and we're going to make giant left turns right at the last second. So what I would suggest is read Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Buy some crypto and actually support the economy. Sign up for Alexandria's beta if you'd like to test it out when it's ready. And start talking about this with everyone you know. Thank you very much. Any questions? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Have you looked at main safe